On August 24, 2023, Japan started dumping tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. The management of Fukushima Daiichi, the same one where the accident happened back in 2011, made this decision. After that disaster, more than 1 million tons of contaminated water accumulated at the destroyed plant, and in 2023 it was decided to release part of it. And by part, I mean 1.25 million tons of contaminated radioactive water. That's enough to fill 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. As horrible as that sounds, the US, Europe, and the USSR have done similar things, and now Japan is doing it too. If you're already getting angry, let me tell you that this radioactive water can be dumped into the ocean. There's just one small catch. But first, let me grab some coffee and I'll explain. Just an unobtrusive reminder for those who forget to hit the like button. Don't forget, in short. So what's the deal with dumping stuff into the ocean that definitely shouldn't be there? Back in 1993, a worldwide agreement was made banning countries from dumping radioactive waste into the seas. You'd think that was quite a while ago, but so far humanity has dumped millions of tons of waste into the world's oceans. As I said, the US, Europe, the USSR, Japan, 13 countries in all have been doing this. The United States was the first country to dump radioactive waste into the ocean in 1946. It makes sense, nuclear energy emerged, so did waste. It's known that between 1946 and 1970, more than 55,000 containers of radioactive waste were dumped in 3 locations in the Pacific. In 1970, the U.S. stopped this practice, but other countries continued to do so. And then that very agreement was made, and after it, the tritium content in the world's oceans significantly decreased. Remember this name. We'll get back to tritium a bit later. But as often happens, dumping continued even after 1993. That's because the unanimously approved ban only applied to highly radioactive materials. Low-level radioactive materials could still be disposed of in the ocean in certain quantities. So what's the deal with tritium? And if the decision was made not to pollute the ocean anymore, at least not like this, why is everyone now on board with Japan's plan to release the water from the damaged nuclear plant? Well, first, not everyone was on board. For example, hundreds of people took to the streets in downtown Seoul, South Korea, protesting the plan to release wastewater from Fukushima. The protesters said that the ocean doesn't belong just to the Japanese government, but to the entire world. Neighboring countries, China and Russia, are also criticizing this decision. For example, a Chinese official called the plan to dump contaminated water selfish and irresponsible. And of course, he urged the Japanese government to abandon it. However, opposition isn't just coming from other countries only. Even Japanese fishermen aren't thrilled with the idea. They're worried about reputational risks and loss of income. After all, their own well-being directly depends on how healthy the ocean is. Fishing communities warn that discharging radioactive water will undo more than a decade of work to restore their reputation. After the accident that happened at the nuclear plant, seafood from the region raised serious concerns among consumers, and it's easy to see why. Back then, fishermen almost lost their livelihoods. Now seafood caught here is subject to one of the strictest radiation checks in the world. Few are willing to eat something that might have been hypothetically contaminated with radiation. More than 12 years have passed since the accident. Local product prices have only just started to rise, and now fishermen seriously fear they'll have to start all over again. In general, the pushback from fishermen has been and continues to be intense. And there are also environmental organizations that are absolutely against it as well. All these protests, along with never-ending debates, have significantly delayed the scheduled dates for the dumping. Originally, they were supposed to begin getting rid of the water much sooner. Deadlines are pressing, and the situation is causing serious concerns. All because the storage tanks for liquid at Fukushima Daiichi are almost full due to constant rainwater getting in. This means that if people don't drain the water themselves in a controlled way, it'll soon just spill out on its own. Look, all of these are water storage tanks. There are just a huge number of them, and each one is almost full. To give you an idea, here's what this same place looked like before 2011, before the disaster and before they had to cover the entire area with water tanks. But there still weren't enough of them. The storage capacity on the side of the nuclear power plant is almost exhausted by now. Moreover, all these tanks are not permanent and need to be regularly checked or replaced. But to do this, you need to figure out what to do with the contaminated water. Besides, a damaged nuclear power plant is a hell of a risk for new environmental contamination. To get rid of this risk, you need to remove the nuclear power plant. And for that, you need space. And there are already tanks with water there. By the way, if you're curious about how the water got polluted, it's pretty simple. It was used to cool fuel rods that melted after a big earthquake and tsunami struck the nuclear power plant in March 2011. After that, the basement areas where the distribution systems, backup generators, and batteries were got flooded. This caused the plant to lose all power, the emergency cooling systems to fail, and eventually the nuclear fuel in the reactors melted down and caused explosions. After the disaster, the company running the power plant pumped water to cool the fuel rods of the Fukushima nuclear reactors and did so every day. As a result, the plant continuously produced contaminated radioactive water, which is now stored in huge tanks. There are over 1,000 of them in total, and they just stand there. And not only do all these tanks take up quite a bit of space, which Japan doesn't exactly have a lot of, but they could also easily be destroyed by a natural disaster. Another earthquake or tsunami, and all that water could just spill out. But isn't this exactly what the Japanese authorities are planning to do? Just dump the water into the ocean, someone among you might say? However, there are some very important nuances that need to be considered. These 1.3 million tons of water stored in huge tanks at the site are planned to be dumped into the ocean 0.6 miles from the shoreline through a special underwater tunnel. I'm saying tunnel for a reason, because for a pipe, this structure's too big. There's also complex equipment there, including pipelines for mixing radioactive water with seawater with a diameter of about 6.5 feet. It took about 2 years to build all of this, so the project is really large scale. And this is just the infrastructure for draining water. They haven't even started the actual dumping yet. The plan is for the pumps to move treated water from the tanks on the shore to the sea and then release it at a depth of 39 feet through a tunnel on the ocean floor. They've considered a lot of things, including valves to halt the water release in emergencies and covers to prevent sand from getting in. If everything goes as planned, the radioactive water, cleaned with a sophisticated treatment system, will be diluted with seawater and then enter the ocean. But the ocean's not a uniform thing. This is how the currents look in the area where the water will be dumped. It's clear that they could carry the radioactive water to the shores of Alaska and Washington states, Canada, China, and the Philippines. Not only can radionuclides be carried by ocean currents across the Pacific Ocean, but marine animals that migrate over long distances can also spread them. There's even a separate 2012 study. A Pacific bluefin tuna carrying radionuclides from Fukushima reached the coast of San Diego within 6 months after the 2011 accident. There's also phytoplankton, free-floating organisms that are the base of the food chain for all marine life. Phytoplankton can also absorb radiation from the water and then pass it on to those who eat phytoplankton. When these isotopes enter the body, they can accumulate, affecting various invertebrates, fish, marine mammals, and even humans. Even microplastics drifting in the ocean, which already worry environmentalists, could theoretically act as carriers of radionuclides. The water they're planning to dump contains an active substance, tritium. Remember? So tritium is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. To simplify, you could say it replaces regular hydrogen in the body's cells and emits beta radiation, which in turn damages internal organs. Sounds not great. Under the influence of tritium, cells age and thin out rapidly. Naturally, metabolism is disrupted, and this process is unlikely to be reversed. Everything is so serious that many scientists believe tritiated water is the main culprit behind the spread of cancer among people living near nuclear power plants. In general, it's not surprising that several countries are protesting against dumping such water into the ocean. But does Japan really have a choice? Well, actually it does. Besides dumping into the sea, there are 4 other long-term options for dealing with contaminated water: injecting it underground, controlled evaporation, hydrogen extraction, and solidification with underground disposal. The Japanese government simply chose dumping. Tritium could also be extracted from water and used, for example, to create batteries. There are also more complex and expensive options: incineration and hydrogen processing, but the amount of water is so huge that it clearly wouldn't work. But it would be possible to use the situation to test new promising methods for tritium removal, but this again is slow, and the deadlines, as you remember, are tight. Japan says that dumping the water is totally safe because it's already gone through several stages of purification at an advanced treatment plant. This is what the room where the purification is done looks like, and they've managed to remove almost all the contamination, except for the tritium itself. It's incredibly difficult to filter out. However, Japanese authorities remind us that dumping water from nuclear power plants into the sea is a common practice. They do it all over the world. It's just that these nuclear power plants are operating, not sitting idle after an accident. For example, the Yangjiang nuclear power plant in China dumped about 112 trillion becquerels of tritium in a year. Becquerel is a unit of measurement for radioactivity. From the plant in South Korea, about 49 trillion becquerels were dumped. We even found such statistics on tritiated water that gets dumped into the ocean by nuclear plants from different countries. As you can see, the entire supply from Fukushima Daiichi is just a drop in the bucket compared to the rest. Dumping tritium from nuclear facilities into water sources still hasn't shown any negative effects on the environment or human health. It sounds strange, but with these volumes, if the water were contaminated, something should have happened by now. Also, to prove that the water is safe, a special aquarium with fish has been built on the station's premises. They swim in water with the same level of radiation as the water that's planned to be dumped, and they seem to be doing quite well. The fish are being monitored to also understand how quickly tritium leaves their bodies. Although tritium causes so much outrage, Japanese authorities and scientists have their own answer. They say that the important thing is that the tritium content in the water doesn't exceed the allowable concentration. To get the right concentration, water from nuclear power plants is usually diluted in a 1:40 ratio. Furthermore, the tritium discharge standard in Japan is more stringent compared to neighboring countries, where, as you remember, such discharges also take place regularly. Plus, controlled discharge is certainly better than uncontrolled, which will happen when the reservoirs eventually overflow and radioactive water simply spills out by the coast on its own. By the way, another argument in favor of controlled discharge: the sea is already radioactive. Water from Fukushima won't increase the level of radioactivity. Annual discharge in the ocean has a lower effect than getting a dental X-ray or a mammogram, even for people who eat a lot of seafood. The water discharge from Fukushima will be a tiny drop in the ocean, both in terms of volume and radioactivity. And it's not just that these discharges have already happened and blah, blah, blah. The key point to remember is that seawater already contains a small amount of tritium. Just by itself, it has nothing to do with human activities. Tritium is naturally produced as part of our usual background radiation and gets into the world's oceans through rain or rivers. And not only in the ocean, there's tritium even in drinking water. In 0.2 gallons of drinking water, there's 7 times less tritium than in 0.2 gallons of the purified water they plan to discharge from Fukushima. Then, when it enters the Pacific Ocean, tritium gets further diluted in the huge volume of water and quickly reaches a level of radioactivity that won't noticeably differ from the background. To give you an idea, the Pacific Ocean contains 18 pounds of pure tritium, while Japan will be dumping 0.002 ounces of tritium each year. At the same time, the total amount of tritium at Fukushima is less than 0.1 ounce, and the dumped water will change the ocean radiation level by less than 0.001% per year. Plus, tritium has a relatively short half-life, so the risk decreases over time. It really looks like the Japanese thought of everything. In general, this is a situation where the actual amount of tritium is incredibly small, and therefore the risk to the environment and people is incredibly small. The International Atomic Energy Agency eventually agreed to Japan's proposed plan. In other words, a group of experts from different countries approved it and considered it sufficiently safe. Moreover, the dumping will be controlled and gradual, and all processes will be fully transparent. There is, however, one but. Even if tritium is indeed not dangerous, there could be more harmful elements left in the dumped water that weren't removed during the purification process. However, the dumping started and is still going on. The latest report was in July 2024, and everything's still in line with international safety standards. Workers at the nuclear power plant were poisoned by contaminated water. 4 workers were exposed to water containing radioactive materials, after which 2 of them were taken to the hospital as a precaution. This happened when they were cleaning pipes in the wastewater filtration system for discharge into the sea, and the hose accidentally came off. 2 of the men were sprayed with water that hadn't been treated yet. In the end, their radiation level was 4 becquerels per 0.1 square inch. That exceeds the threshold considered safe. Ban on seafood. Despite all the scientists' arguments, after Japan dumped the first batch of water into the ocean, China announced an immediate ban on importing all seafood from Japan. In essence, what Japanese fishermen feared the most happened. They lost a major market for their products. Naturally, this has been done to prevent the risk of radioactive contamination of food products. Moreover, the ban extends to 10 out of 47 prefectures in Japan, and it's really quite large scale. Due to the ban, in August 2023, imports dropped by 67% compared to the same month a year earlier. Radioactive fish. In May 2023, fish living near the drainage outlets at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant contained radioactive cesium at levels 180 times higher than the safety limits in Japan. In black rockfish, they found 18,000 becquerels per 2 pounds of cesium-137, while the maximum allowable level is 100 becquerels per 2 pounds. And in total, from May 2022 to May 2023, 44 fish were found with cesium levels above the norm. It seems that this has nothing to do with the concerns raised by the discharges of treated water. However, there are suspicions that there might be a leak from one of the tanks that has, after all, overflowed. However, these are unconfirmed reports. You owe me a like. See you later.